Good evening to those bored enough to watch. In the previous video, I discussed Five Nights at Candy's and the remaster it received subsequent to the original version's release. I thought both versions of the game are great and I really enjoyed my time with both versions of the game. However, this game would go on to receive a sequel, Five Nights at Candy's 2, which released on February 28th in 2016 by Emil Macko. I personally really enjoyed my time with this game and how it takes the steps towards trying something new while once again being inspired by what the Five Nights at Freddy's games had to offer at the time while taking the steps towards trying to mold it into its own experience. The first game was inspired by Five Nights at Freddy's 1 and 2, in which was very obvious in its layout. This second game takes inspiration from the third official game, in ways that I will discuss in due course. Inspiration aside, the game still takes the steps at trying to differentiate the mechanics and put its own spin on things, and that's something I want to take the time to appreciate in this video, as well as the improved nature of the game compared to the first. Five Nights at Candy's 2 is a great game, and in this video I want to talk about why I would recommend it. So, with that said, let's discuss Five Nights at Candy's 2. The game begins with a text conversation which sees a friend of ours reminding us that we need to spend 5 nights in an old factory due to us losing a bet. They ask if I'm scared. I laugh my ass off and tell them I'm not. They laugh theirs off too and we begin the first night. Five Nights at Candy's 2 plays very differently to its predecessor, in which as opposed to being in an office, you're at the back of the central hallway with access to cameras which you need to use to keep an eye on the animatronics and their position. When looking into the darkness, you need to flash your light which will give you a moment to see what's in front of you. When you see an animatronic there, you'll need to use the audio that will play a sound of a phone ringing to lure the animatronics away from you. Though, if you keep the sound playing for too long, the animatronic will temporarily disable the phone line, making it unusable for a certain amount of time. Thus, a good way of combating this is turning the sound off the moment you see the animatronic move to the camera you played the noise in. In this first night, you will be mostly dealing with Withered Cindy, though there will be more to come. After we beat this night, we enter a mini game in which we play as Chester the chimpanzee. We make our way to the office and find a key in which we can use to unlock a room we saw prior, though when getting to the door, the mini game ends. We'll be playing these mini games at the end of every night after we beat them, in which I think that while they serve their purpose from the perspective of someone following the law, in which I will talk about when the time comes, in terms of gameplay they're really nice brief moments to play through to break up the main game, and which is something I really appreciate. Another one of the many things I want to appreciate about this game is how much more improved the visuals are compared to the original version of the first game. As mentioned, I liked how that game looked, but everything here is so much more improved, with better lighting as well as better looking models for the game, as seen through the different camera angles and even the jump scares. With that, we move on to the second night. This night sees the introduction of Withered Chester, of whom unlike the other animatronics who gradually make their way to the central hall, he'll try to get to you through the vents. When you hear the sound of vents banging, that's him trying to get into one of them, in which you'll have to find the one which he's at and ring the phone which will ward him off. A nice detail here is that the game helps you in trying to find which camera he's in through directional sound, and which is helpful in narrowing down where he is. One of the many things I do like about his inclusion in this game is that he does encourage usage of the cameras, as in the grand scheme of things, the only thing you need to pay attention to is whether the animatronics are in the central hallway or not. With the inclusion of Chester and his contribution to the gameplay, it does promote usage of the camera to find and stop him from getting to you, in which I think is a detail worth appreciating. With that though, we enter another minigame where we play as Penguin, of whom searches around the restaurant in search of Chester's body parts. It seems as if though he was dismantled by someone. After we find 3 of his body parts, the minigame ends. The third night of the game is where we see Withered Candy and Penguin make their appearances. Withered Candy will mostly act the same way Cindy does, meaning you need to keep an eye on both of them and deter them from getting to the central hallway. Penguin doesn't jump scare you, more rather he scares the functionality out of the camera system. See, when using the camera, there are times where he'll show up in front of the screen, in which when he does you need to move to another camera or flip down the monitor. Failure to do so will ultimately result in the camera system restarting, which leaves you vulnerable to any threats looming ahead. The reaction time for this becomes smaller with each passing night, as does the risk of being jump scared. One thing I do want to appreciate with Penguin's role in this game is that he is much more of a threat compared to the previous game. In that game, he really did feel like more of another animatronic to avoid, in which while the consequences of him getting into the office was aside from being jump scared, I almost didn't even acknowledge his presence in the game until he was at the door due to how incredibly easy he was to avoid. In this game, while it is true that I tended to ignore him most of the time, doing so ultimately has its consequences due to his increased role in the game. If he impacts you in one of the worst ways possible, as especially in later nights, you will be incredibly lucky to not be jump scared after Penguin shuts down the camera system. I really appreciate that about this game. Every animatronic is harder to avoid compared to the previous game, which which really does allow for the setting of this game to shine. There are no doors, just you, the cameras, and the phone lines, and whatever hides beyond the darkness ahead of you. That is something I really appreciate. Penguin's inclusion in this game makes every camera switch count, and not making effective use of your camera will prove detrimental. With that, after beating this night, we enter another minigame where we play as Blank this time. He needs to collect the drawings seemingly left behind by children during the opening hours of the restaurant, in which after we collect 4 of them, the minigame ends. The 4th night of this game is more of an intensified version of the 3rd, which is where I want to talk about something else in this game. This game is definitely a lot more easier to play through than the first. Playing through it allowed for me to realize that this game struggles to find a balance between creating gameplay that isn't overbearingly difficult and gameplay that isn't boringly easy to play through. I don't intend to say that I found this game boring, quite the opposite in fact. The gameplay loop is thoroughly entertaining, but at times it left me wanting more of a challenge that I knew I could beat. Only few times did I find myself dying, and most of those times were in the 720 mode. While I enjoy what is here, I do wish that this game would give more of a challenge at points, though with that, we complete this night and enter another minigame. This time, we're playing as Cindy, of whom ventures into the building to find and return Candy's tie. After finding it in the office and returning it, the minigame ends. I want to take this moment to briefly appreciate how much more of an eerie setting is present in the menu screen for this game, showing a dark environment with the animatronics barely visible, but just enough to the point where they are the focal point of the screen aside from the options. I also like how the music here foreshadows the directional sound present in this game when Chester begins knocking on the vent. With that though, we begin the 5th night. This is where we finally see the introduction of Blank into the gameplay. Functionally, he acts the same as Candy and Cindy, but he is more aggressive than them and ultimately makes for a more chaotic experience as you're now having to keep an eye on multiple things at once. Furthermore, you also need to be more careful about where you lead different animatronics to, as at times you will find that the camera you try to lure the animatronic in the central hallway to is already taken. This definitely almost got me killed at the end of the night, but I ran into some kind of glitch where the jump scare didn't initiate, meaning I wasn't able to do anything but sit and wait for the night to finish. I suppose Cindy can't jump scare me if I refuse to look at her. Eventually, after defiantly glitching my way to victory, we end the 5th night. We enter another minigame. We play as Candy, of whom is seemingly loitering around the building. When nearing the office, we find police officers guarding the premises. When reaching inside, we find a dead night guard, with laughter in the distance. Following it, we eventually reach an open door, in which, when nearing it, slams shut. Officers burst into the room, armed with batons and tasers, and one possessing such weaponry speeds towards you. We see a newspaper discussing the scheduling of the demolition of the factory, thus ending the game. With that, I'm going to talk about some of the extras. Upon beating the game, the extra content does open up to you, the first being that of the 6th night, in which playing through as such is somewhat different to the previous 5 nights. For example, as opposed to trying to ward off the previous animatronics that we've been seeing up until this point of the game, in this night we'll be warding off the cat and rat, of whom seem to fill in the roles of all the differing animatronics in the game. For example, the rat will be trying to intercept the camera feed at times, in which sees the window of time to react to him even smaller than it was with Penguin on the 5th night. Furthermore, the cat will be trying to get into the vents the same way Withered Chester did in the previous 5 nights. In addition to this, both animatronics will be heavily aggressive in getting to the central hallway and will do so a lot. While in a lot of ways, this 6th night is a lot more easy than the 5th due to the fact that there's less animatronics, there is a lot in place that makes it more difficult than the others. For example, the time to react to the rat intercepting the cameras is significantly shorter than it was with the penguin, meaning if he does happen to achieve as such, then you're on the brink of death while waiting for it to come back. With that aside though, after beating this night, we enter another minigame. We play as Old Candy, of whom follows a Shadow Candy into a room where a mechanic is at work. Startled by our presence, we get shocked. We then play as Blank once again, who's tasked with collecting more drawings, though this time there is a 5th drawing available that we couldn't obtain last time, depicting the Shadow Candy, in which after collecting he appears in front of us. We then cut back to Old Candy. The place is filled with children, partying, eating and laughing within the walls of the restaurant, enjoying the entertainment, whether it comes from being accompanied by each other or the animatronics. However, as opposed to paying any attention to them, we follow the Shadow Candy to the office, encountering an impatient parent on our way there. When we eventually reach the office, we find a crying child, of whom upon noticing us is filled with joy as he walks to his waiting parent. Upon following him, we find that his parent is causing distress upon the child. Old Candy approaches the two with intentions to stop the cause of distress by any means necessary. The screen cuts to black. We see a newspaper, this time discussing the burning of the old factory. According to the article, it was caused by faulty wiring and systems within the deserted place, in which while the fire department tried to do everything they could to save the building, it eventually became nothing but rubble. The 6th night in this game definitely has a lot more to show in it than the previous game's iteration of such, in which in that game it was simply an extra challenge that the player could indulge in if they were looking for as such. In this game, it provides more story as well as an epilogue to the story we've been following up until this point, in which is something I really appreciate about this game. After beating it, you can unlock the extras menu, in which allows you to view things such as the animatronics, both their newer versions and their withered states, and you can also view the developer sketches as well as the jump scares. The custom night in this game doesn't exist in the sense that the player doesn't have the opportunity to customize the AI levels of the animatronics, though from the extras menu you do have the opportunity to play through the 720 mode in 2 different iterations, the 7th and the 8th night. I attempted this challenge, though like the last video I'm probably the least qualified to. It's definitely quite a challenge compared to the other nights, as everyone present is much more aggressive than what we've seen, though it is there for those daring enough to try. I really enjoyed my time with this game. It clearly tries new things with the mechanics of the third official game and tries to adapt it into its own experience while still maintaining the inspiration, and that is something I really appreciate. With that, I want to conclude things. Overall, I would recommend Five Nights at Candy's 2. It's a brilliant game that I enjoyed my time with, and I would really recommend it to others who enjoy not only the official Five Nights at Freddy's games, but the first installment in this fan series. It truly is adaptive of that experience, capturing its inspiration in a manner which allows for it to try new things and adapt its source material into something close to it but giving itself the ability to stand on its own. That is something I really appreciate about this game. While I do wish that the game would find more of a balance in terms of difficulty, I still thoroughly enjoyed my time with this game and would definitely recommend it to those interested. So, if you are interested, Five Nights at Candy's 2 is a great game that tries something new compared to its predecessor, but ultimately recaptures what made it such a great game to play through. I would recommend Five Nights at Candy's 2. So, there's the video. I hope you all enjoyed it. I just want to say thank you for all the support that the previous video on the first game has been getting, and I hope that this video doesn't disappoint. With that though, if you want to view the list of games I want to make videos about in the future, then you can always do so through the link in the description. Additionally, if you want to follow me, then my socials will be linked in the description, as well as any afterthoughts or messages I may want to add. With that, I haven't really got much else I want to say, so I'll see you all in my next video. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I wish you all a very pleasant evening.